Hi guys, I'm Ellie and welcome to Susty Talks. Today I'm talking about being a Latina and a often whitewashed sustainable fashion movement. I am in my local library trying to film this. I've gotten a couple Karen stares, but it's fine. I'm in the back, like I'm not filming anyone, so this should be fine. Try to film this numerous times because I'm a bit nervous, but if you're new here to Susty Talks, it's essentially a community-centered podcast that sparks genuine conversations on ethical fashion and sustainable change and intersectional solutions. Hopefully it becomes the space that helps drive positive change and empower action and to make sustainability more accessible. Cannot talk. I'm also self-conscious. There's so many Karens in this library. But I do want to say that this is a self-funded initiative. I offer vintage clothing on my eBay, on my Depop, and now on Whatnot. So you can look at those links in my description. And I'm also working on Mexican artisanal denim collection. So excited. But to get started, I do want to talk about that I'm fourth generation Mexican American. I've had a couple grandfathers establish their life here in the United States, but I fortunately had parents that were raised in Mexico. So I come from a predominantly very Mexican household. I grew up speaking Spanish. It's actually my first language. And I've always seen myself as really Mexican American. Like, I can be no sabo sometimes. I can struggle with Spanish, but most likely my parents will speak to me in Spanish. They'll say you're Mexican, although I was raised in Mexico. So I'm from both here and from there, which is a saying for Mexican Americans that are culturally Mexican but haven't really been in the country itself. So yeah, I really do identify with my culture. I eat the traditional Mexican foods. I resonate with the fashion. I resonate with the vibrancy and the resilience of hardworking Mexicans. And overall, I love Latinos. They're just so happy, and they're just willing to help, very community driven. We say that we're cousins with each other, even though we may not really technically be cousins. We say, compadre, ¿cómo estás? How are you? So that sense of family and connection, even though we're technically strangers, has always stuck with me. If you don't know who I am, I was the first one in my family to get a bachelor's. I got a bachelor's in fashion merchandising and business management, and I have certifications in social justice and whatever, but I graduated back in 2019. This mic is horrible. I'm so sorry, but it's the setup today. But yeah, I got 2 bachelors, and that was a while ago, and I'm $40K in debt. Throughout my college experience, I was really curious about fashion and how it was made, and I came across the term sustainable fashion, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you're watching, and I just started Googling and researching and figuring out what that actually meant. My professors really did fail me in a lot of ways in explaining what that meant. And then because I have this very strong Latinx culture in me, I was what is Mexicans doing in sustainable fashion? I had no clue what even artisanal fashion was. I didn't know that existed. I was raised in a way where I was very disconnected with my grandparents. I didn't know the legacy or the history behind how the family came to be. I didn't know the family tree or whatever, and there was just a lot of family feuds, so I was never close to my grandparents. I was never close to either sides of my dad or mom's ancestors. I had photos and stuff, but that doesn't really say a lot. So that was just a big thing that affected me in terms of my journey in fashion. But when I started learning more about sustainable fashion, I read a lot of books and Google articles and sites that were just usually coming from Western perspectives. Now, I don't know people's origin stories. I don't know if people are from certain cultures or not, but the thing that stood out was most of the time they were based in the United States, and I just took that as a given. I was okay, that's just normal, I guess. But the more and more I started reading, I was okay, there's themes. They're from the United States or from Europe. And I didn't really think much of it, but I started to learn more about sustainable fashion. I learned how there was interchangeable terms like slow fashion, eco fashion, stuff like that. So I just read everything I could possibly get my hands on, anything that could possibly explain like how fast fashion even came to be. I just found myself like seeing a lot of people call themselves experts in the field, whether it was because they got like a master's degree or because they had a certification or had been studying this for a couple years. So I was just trying to like figure out like how they got certified or how they just were able to call themselves an expert. But yeah, I didn't really have anything against them personally. They were really a huge roadmap, but it just took a lot of practice of understanding like the different keywords and different like sources that they're grabbing their information from. But one of the main concepts that I saw was like how they wanted to reuse clothing, how they wanted to recycle clothing, how they wanted to rewear things and just keep things for a very long time. So I think one of the new topics that I've seen is more so like the ethics of the industry, and like seeing how people practice it in different parts of the world, because it can look different for everyone. Like everyone can practice it in their own way. So just seeing the nuance within Western ideologies was like starting to open my eyes to a lot of different things. It was a long journey. Like I started researching this when I was like 18 or 19, and then I just continued on, and I'm now 28. Sorry, I'm like scratching myself. That was kind of weird. But I think seeing the nuance in their perspectives, even though it was like mainly from a Western ideology, just showed me like the diversity of morals and values and like action steps. But one of the things that I noticed a lot was like no one was really talking about the lived Latino or Latina experience. Maybe it's because most authors or quote-unquote experts weren't from a Latino country, and I don't know, like that just kind of was in my head, but I didn't really think much of it. But I didn't have my own, I guess, perspective reflected back in the page. No one was talking about how like poor Latinos, for example, like my upbringing, we naturally had to mend our clothing. We had to use my older brother's clothing. I had to like really try to look fashionable, even though I didn't really have much to look at. But I had very limited options. I didn't really have much money to work with. So that kind of forced me to be creative in like what I wore and how I styled myself. And I only really had my older brother's closet to work with because my parents didn't really buy me anything. That is something that I didn't really see in any books or any articles or sustainability metrics. So I think that having lived experiences of those that come from like low income, like culturally diverse perspectives does further illuminate the nuance and like the cultural aspect to fashion. Because I mean, we're all making those choices. Like we're all making things based on our lives, you know, like whether it's our decisions for work or decisions for clothing, whether it's the food choices, like we're all heavily influenced by a lot of different elements in our life. And some of those do come from our culture. But with my culture, my upbringing, I also had limited finances. So those elements really did create how I learned sustainable fashion and embraced what I was learning and reading from books, if that makes sense. I also think that there was a lot of barriers for me to enter sustainable fashion from the get-go. Like just even buying the books, it was a struggle for me. Like being a low-income Latina trying to research something that's very niche is expensive. Like you're not going to find these books in, you know, the mall or the mall. Yeah, the mall. There's no bookstores in the mall. Or like Barnes and Nobles. That's what I meant. You can't really find these books even in the library, which is supposed to be a free resource. You can like order them. Obviously, you can order these books like online, but like they're gonna take forever to get to the library, or I don't know, like it was just like a huge process. And I was like, let me just order it used or from Amazon. It was like easier that way, but like most of the times like I didn't have the money to order them. And when I did go the library route, like probably take like 2 months of a process to get the book in my hands. And by that point I was like, I don't got the time, or like I've gone a different route. So it was a laggy, difficult journey, and I really had to try to learn. Also, like learning from these quote-unquote leaders or experts felt very intimidating because they didn't come from the same background. Like they were either like highly educated or had like years and years of experience in like either corporate America. Let me fix this. Or they like were high functioning like type A people. Like I remember meeting Elizabeth Klein because she wrote a book and had her like signing release party in Chicago, and I went. I was like a senior in high school, and I was so intimidated. I actually got my book signed, which is crazy to think about, but I've had that book for years. And I looked up to Elizabeth Klein. Like I saw her as like, wow, she's like the brains behind like what can be possible for sustainable fashion. But I didn't really feel like I resonated. Her background was different. Her experiences were different. I feel like that's, I guess, normal for everyone. Like we're all going to be different. We're all going to have our nuances. Or like we're all going to maybe go to a different school if you don't know each other. It just felt like I couldn't really continue my journey by, I guess, looking up to her. That was just me. There's nothing wrong with Elizabeth. It was just like me. There's also a lot of things in terms of like fashion and daily life that I do want to talk about. So in terms of like being limited with resources, often enough you're making choices between feeding yourself, like survival, versus like aesthetic based desires, which is often like more luxury pieces, which often can be sustainable fashion because sustainable fashion can be pricey. So, and there is barriers in like, okay, like I can't really buy from this brand, or I can't really take the time to take a sewing class to know how to mend this because I have like 6 classes this semester and I have 3 jobs and I have to go babysit my brother and you have all these other things. So sometimes like practicing sustainable fashion doesn't fit this role of like survival, you know? Even though it's kind of inherently already part of your life because you're forced to rewear, recycle, reuse some things, to take extra time out for like, I guess like miscellaneous things, it didn't fit. It didn't fit, and I was so sad, and I was like, dang, like I need to make more time for sustainable fashion. And because I started off in college and then graduated and went on to different programs, I slowly started to like read more articles. I started reading my books. I started to get more immersed in sustainability in the Chicago scene. But a lot of times I see that a lot of people in not only fashion spaces but in like environmental spaces were often like full of very privileged people that were often like American based or like not American based, but like had generational wealth or generational privilege. Sorry also if I'm not looking at the camera. There's just a lot of people and I'm like paranoid, and this is my first time filming a podcast in public. I'm kind of freaking out. It's also going to be a shorter podcast as well, just because I don't have a lot to say, but I did see a lot of privilege and a lot of money, generational wisdom that I wish I had, but I didn't. So I always felt like I was trying to like push myself up into the ranks. But when you're like comfortable, there's often a lot of like classism and maybe unconscious exclusivism that you perpetuate, especially privileged Caucasian women. Maybe they do it unintentionally, maybe they don't want to be a Karen, but they do have some like values that shape their thoughts, that shape their presence, it shapes how they take action, how they interact with others. These biases can affect everyone, no matter what field you're in, no matter if it's a sustainable fashion or whatever. But I always had to learn how to code switch out of a desire to be accepted, to be loved, to be, I guess, ranked up in the fields of like these leaders, these experts. I was like, okay, like how do I make them like me? How do I make them feel like I'm part of them? And most of the times like they were willing to meet with me. Like I met coordinators of sustainability efforts in Chicago. I met activists. I met all the sorts of different people, right? And I think they were surprised of who I was once they met me, because they would see my work, but usually you don't attach a face to a role when you're like mostly behind the scenes. And I didn't really have much photos of myself, and I'm like very white presenting. I changed my voice to talk in public. I don't really talk like this. Sometimes it comes out real, like sometimes I sound like me sometimes in my live streams. I'm stuttering because I'm nervous. I'm like, oh my god, like people actually know how I really sound like. But if you go on my live streams, like sometimes when my real voice comes out. And then I forgot where I was going with this. Okay, yeah. I also have a dad that's from Jalisco, and that makes me a bit more white-toned, to the point that people are like, well, you don't know the struggles of being Mexican because you're more white-presenting, which is a whole different conversation to have. But I was raised by Mexican-American parents, which are beautiful brown people. It's just I happen to get some genes from the colonizers in my past. Again, that's a whole different conversation, but it is tied to the sense of like, I try to use my white, I guess, privilege and my code switching to rank up. Sometimes it worked, most times it didn't, because they were so like surprised at what they were looking at, I guess. I don't know. Because they would never talk to me again. They would never like actually collaborate with me. They never partner with me. They'd move on. It happened over and over and over again, to the point that I didn't try anymore. But yeah, it's sad to think about. But I was recently invited to this like lunch club effort by someone that wants to fund a sustainable fashion club, and that took me by surprise. I was like, oh, like someone actually wants to work with me, I guess. I don't know. It made me really emotional. But they were charging like $26. No, it's on the 26th. Yeah, tomorrow. Oh my god, tomorrow, the 26th, is happening. It's hosted by Sustainable Fashion Club and like another blogger. Or Sustainable Fashion Club? What am I talking about? It's hosted by, what's it called? Sustainable Fashion Week. There we go. Gotta remember my facts. I'm so bad with names. But Sustainable Fashion Week Chicago is a new initiative in Chicago. Wait, I need my matcha, but it's like the tripod. Okay, let me focus. But they're hosting this lunch, and it was like the first time that someone invited me to something around sustainable fashion in Chicago after like 5 years of being rejected. I've been in this world for so many years, and I've had so many setbacks, but I've continued to like care. Like that didn't stop me. Like I actually cared more about sustainable fashion because I was like, well, I need our perspective. I need Latinas to be heard, because they're not going to make space for me or us in general. Like, it's been proven historically and personally. Like, a lot of times Latinos don't make it at the seat of the table. They don't make room for us. They don't give us opportunities. I just look at the DEI situation that's happening. That just shows the amount of racism that is present, and I am going to try my hardest to make sustainable fashion come from more of a Latina perspective. But I do have that fear people are going to be like, oh, she's a white Mexican, so therefore her opinion is no. Like, it zeroes out because she's white presenting. That is always an unsettling back of the head moment of like, maybe my efforts will be for nothing. But I know that I don't uphold Western ideology. I don't believe in individualism. I don't really see the ultimate value of capitalism as it's seen by the far right. I don't see how Earth is an unlimited source of extraction. Like, I don't see things as a typical American. I come from a socialist background. I've said this so many different times, and YouTube videos and podcast episodes, my live streams and all my content. Like, I have a different set of values, and I just want to normalize those because they're important. Like, we can do so much more better than the current structure that we're in. I've noticed from certain sustainable fashion leaders and experts, not to dog on them, but I've noticed that they often uphold capitalistic values, even though they care about sustainable fashion. So everyone's coming from sustainable fashion in a different way, but I want to make mine come from a cultural perspective and from a lived experience of surviving and the context of a socialist and an activist, what that we desperately need within this movement if we're going to progress towards the change that we really need. So DII efforts, whether they're in a corporation or in, let's say, a movement like this one, sustainable fashion, we need to work towards equity together. We need more diversity. We need more perspectives. We need nuance. If we will want to win this, fight, we will need as many people as possible. And I hope I can be the recruiter of Latinos and Latinas and uplift their messages and uplift their actions and their lived experiences. And that's why I have guests on. That's why I ask them questions about what they're doing. Maybe I don't inherently support, consumerism, but I'm happy to uplift a fashion designer. I'm happy to uplift someone that creates upcycled jewelry. These are the things that will counteract systems of like buying from corporations and giving our money to like cheap stuff. Like we need to like start somewhere, and sometimes the easiest place is to like shift how we use our money. It can be easy to be like, okay, like instead of buying from Amazon, I can buy from my friend's local jewelry shop. That's a small way to get started, and then hopefully from there we can be like, okay, like maybe I can keep using this, or I can thrift, or I can shop from Depop, or I can donate to this garment worker center so they can support the garment workers, and then things can progress, you know, like you can start volunteering, you can start hosting your own clothing swap, you can take a bit more initiative, or you can make content on this, or you can create community around it. Like we all start from somewhere. So I do think that intersectional approach can allow us to feel more seen and present within this effort. And we can never forget either that like Latinos, like Latin Americans, can often enough be garment workers that are paying the cost for our Western ideological ideals that turn into like business systems that exploit them. So we always have to think about like the labor justice. We have to think about the immigration issues as well. Like, for example, in California, I'm sure you know what's happening right now if you're watching this in real time. Like the LA ICE raids have basically kidnapped innocent people, both legal or illegal immigrants and undocumented. Oh, I don't think people are illegal. Let me say, they've taken both undocumented and documented people, whether they're not in the due process, but they've literally taken people without any legal right to in a sanctuary city. For what? And some garment workers were taken, and that's so unjust, and not only a human level, but like within the fashion level, because who's going to make our clothing on a national level? Our current president says, oh, we need our local industries alive again. But like, who's the one that's fueling the local fashion scene here in the United States? Immigrant Californian garment workers. So like, to displace them, like the logic here of all sorts does not make sense. Like they deserve to live here. They've paid taxes. They've worked here, you know. I want to emphasize that again. They've worked here. They've contributed to our society, and they've provided the labor behind our local national production. So like they're actually a net positive. Like they provide value. So this rhetoric that Latinos are like lazy or criminals or like not enough or not educated, it's a lie. Like just because you don't go to college or just because you don't come from like this country doesn't make you less than. I think Latinos are beautiful. They have so much to offer. They have so much heart, so much resilience, and such an ability to be part of our culture, not only for the word that they give, but like for just the naturalness. Like it's natural to have difference. It's natural to have people from different cultures. Like imagine if we were all the same. Imagine if we all spoke the same language. Imagine if we all liked the same things. Life would be boring. I don't want to live in the IKEA-fication of America. Like, I don't want to live in the IKEA of a world. Like, I want to be in the midst of everything. Like, it's natural to be different. So when we talk about sustainable fashion, it's the same thing for me. Like, I don't want to just hear from the same perspectives or from the same background. Like, we need more than the IKEA-fication of sustainable fashion. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to continue being faced by classism and exclusivism and privilege. I don't want others to speak for me. Like, if you come from privilege, like often enough you haven't come from like struggle, you haven't come from a lack of resources, most likely. So instead of like speaking for us, we should let like the immigrant garment workers speak on their own behalf, and we should uplift them, uplift the voices of immigrant communities, of culturally diverse people. We need more people from marginalized backgrounds in sustainable fashion. And I do think that sustainable fashion is already lived out in a lot of different ways. We just have made this term so, like, I don't know, explicit. Like, it's a different niche topic that doesn't already exist in our lives. But most of the time we go around re-wearing our stuff. Like, I think most of us has re-worn a piece, like a clothing, like a shirt. I also think that Latinos hold a lot of emotional weight right now with the heaviness of the world. a lot of oppression and injustice. So if you can do anything to care for others, it does help a lot. You know, like, we shouldn't take on everything, especially when you don't have a lot of resources or privilege most of the time. But yeah, I really do hope that more Latinos feel like they have a place in sustainable fashion, despite the weight of like injustice and oppression and like struggle and like trying to get to the table, because we have so much to offer on a collective and individual level. Like, no matter if you're no sabo, or no matter if like you're from Guatemala or Ecuador, or, you know, from Brazil, like, we need every Latino. It shouldn't just be like from Western people. I know that maybe there's this lack of awareness of like the niche term, or there's setbacks to like being more, I guess, quote unquote, thought leaders or experts or like action takers. But I would just love to see them take up more space. So yeah, hopefully that made sense. Hopefully you resonate. I'm sure you are. I'm gonna have more guests from Latino backgrounds who are doing their part to fight for a better fashion industry, whether it's through their branding efforts or whether it's through their union work or whatever. Like, whatever the background is, there's so many different things people can do. I will have them on my podcast, Susty Talks. Yeah, hopefully you like this topic. I just think it's sad too that like fast fashion is being dumped in the global south because of overconsumption from the US and Europe. And like, oh my god, I would love to see more sustainable fashion books in Spanish. Like, there's so little resources in Spanish, and there's like very little like culturally relevant frameworks to work with. Also, I just want us to care about artisanal fashion. That's my bias before I leave. Like, that's my bias, man. I want us to be wearing our artisanal fashion, and I can lead by example. It's just I don't want to ruin my clothing. I don't want to ruin my artisanal fashion. But imagine if we all wore our like culturally artisanal fashion and goods, and like stopped buying from like fast fashion and stopped buying into like Eurocentric ideals. That would be so cool. And more like Latino and Latina models in like the fashion industry, especially in like high fashion, where those models are like almost made a myth. But yeah, hopefully you like this podcast episode. I do want to emphasize fashion is politics, and our lived experiences are part of that, and our role in fashion is part of that. And we have to talk about Latinos. We have to talk about their dynamic in fashion when our lives are essentially politicized at this point. Consider learning from Latino cultures if you're new to the side of the water. There's a lot of elders, like abuelitas, and those that have lived, who can really teach us a lot on how to mend our clothing, how to reuse stuff, how to like pass garments down through generations. So yeah, let's work together. And yeah, this is the end of the podcast. Until next time, peace and love. Ellie, bye.